Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, let me thank Council on Pakistan Relations for providing me this great opportunity to meet with the leaders of Pakistani diaspora in North America. And I think we are very lucky as a nation that we today have one more condition fulfilled, which is a prerequisite for any fast developing country to take its trajectory. If you look at China, you look at Korea, you look at Malaysia, you look at Thailand, you look at India, in each of these countries, the role of its immigrant community, its diaspora, has been very significant. They have been a major catalyst for development through their rich experiences, through their resources, and the bridges and the links which they build between developed world and their countries. That played a very critical role. And I think now, alhamdulillah, in case of Pakistan also, Pakistani diaspora has reached a level where it can play the same role which in case of, as I said, other countries, their diasporas have played. So therefore it is indeed a great opportunity to have this interaction or meeting with Pakistani leaders, leaders of American Pakistanis in USA. Pakistan, as you all know, is going through the most promising transition. I will not say is passing through challenging times, because that is a phrase we have all been hearing for 65 years, and we have somehow come to hating it, that every time there is a challenge, what is this? I think how I look at it is that Pakistan now is passing through one of the most promising transitions, which will, inshallah, poise Pakistan for a very bright future. How and why do I say this? And I used to say this even 2 years ago, when there was a government whose performance, people had many issues with, and there were real concerns with, how the country was being run. But even then, I was very hopeful, because to look at the future of any country, you need to look at two different sets of indicators. One are regime-specific indicators, which I call weather factors, and other are the state-specific factors, which are the climate factors, which actually determine the health of the ecosystem of that state. Now, when all of this literature you see, which comes out by many cynics, that Pakistan is a failing state, and I laugh at it, because there are certain conditions which failing states meet, or there are certain weaknesses which states which are failing, they exhibit. In case of Pakistan, the journey or the movement of those ecosystem factors was actually on a positive trajectory, on an ascending path. What are the factors on which health of any state would depend? First of all, rule of law. There is no state which will survive without rule of law. If you look at Pakistan in last 10 years, the movement for rule of law has gained currency. The power of judiciary in its independence has gained ground and acceptance. Today, law is exerting itself in areas which were considered to be out of bounds. Today you have missing Pakistanis who were not accounted for. Nobody knew where they have gone, whether they have gone underground or the skies have uplifted them. Nobody knew about them. But then, when their families went to the courts, the power of rule of law, the soft power of rule of law prevailed, and many of those missing Pakistanis were finally produced before courts and they could join their families. That was a very promising sign that a citizen could go to the courts, could invoke his fundamental rights or her fundamental rights, and could get protection from institutions of state for his or her fundamental rights. So this, I would not say has become an ideal situation, but this is a beginning of a journey which I think offers a lot of hope. So if the movement on rule of law is on a positive trajectory, is on ascendancy path, I have no reason to fear for future of Pakistani state. Two, every failing state has more confusion about its principles and fundamentals which govern the running of that state. There is more controversy around constitution of that country. In Pakistan, we see that there is an increasing consensus, a growing consensus on what direction should the state take and what should be our constitution. So the constitutionalism is on an ascendancy path. The political parties came together despite their differences. National parties, regional parties, secular parties, religious parties, all shades of political parties showed the capacity to work together and do some of the very important legislative and constitutional amendments with consensus. And now we have a constitution which is free from all the viruses. It has been completely dewormed from all the viruses which were put by different military regimes. It today stands in its original pure form. We have a constitution which has resolved a very controversial issue of provincial autonomy through dialogue, accommodation, and political process. So there is a greater consensus on the constitution than there ever was, and which I think is a very positive sign for the future of any state. Three, the strategic direction of the country. Which way should the country go? Again, there is a growing consensus on some of the strategic thrusts which we must follow. Today, the political forces are realizing that we have to have greater consensus on national policies, whether it relates to extremism, whether it relates to economy, whether it relates to the nature of state. Today there is no political force which quietly or secretly wants to be part of any conspiracy with the establishment or with the military to topple any democratic government. There is a complete clarity among all political parties that no, military rule is not a solution, it is part of the problem. So no matter what it takes, we have to continue our journey on democratic path and build our civil institutions for our future development. So there is unlike in the past when parties in opposition will try to hoodwink establishment and would cross the red lines to undermine the mandate of the party in power at every cost. So I don't think that is there. Relations with India, in the past we had different shades of opinions, but over the years there is complete consensus that we must walk the path of peace and we must try to pursue dialogue and iron out our differences through dialogue, and we should focus more on development and should have a policy which is based on zero conflict. So I think that is again something which is very promising. Political actors, as I said, have shown the capacity to compete and collaborate simultaneously. Now this is a sign of a very mature industry. I am a business student of business and management, and in our strategy they say that in an industry which is really mature, the players have the capability to fiercely compete for their market share, but collaborate for the industry share. And if you have that capability in an industry, that industry is considered as a very mature industry, where players can compete for their market share, but they can also collaborate to protect their turf. Like Pepsi and Coke might be in a very cutthroat competition for their market share, but when it will come to protecting the market of cola, they will join hands and compete against other beverages to protect their industry share. So in Pakistan also, at many times we were called friendly opposition or Noora Kushti. That was neither Noora Kushti nor friendly opposition. It was that capability that while you are against particular regime, but for the country, for the democratic process, you must also learn to collaborate to protect your industry share or the democratic space. So I think that again is a very problem. Freedom of expression. No state ever fails where there is growing freedom of expression. The space for freedom of expression is growing. Media in Pakistan, according to many, is more free than media in the United States. Sometimes it overplays with its independence, but that is growing. Nobody can apply censorship to media in Pakistan. There are attacks on media. There are different forces which are threatened by this growing space of media's independence. But then, each and every threat has given new impetus, has given new vitality to the movement for freedom of expression, and no attack on media has reversed this process. So this again is a very promising sign. And finally, in management we say that an organization where employees have a higher level of engagement, that organization never fails. A failing organization has a low level of engagement of its employees. In Pakistan we see engagement of the citizens and particularly the educated classes in the affairs of the state in the last 10 years has considerably increased and is growing. Myself being in politics for last 18 years, I see a noticeable change. Classes which thought that their business was either just business or IT or banking or financial or whatever, the doctors or engineers, they just saw themselves as professionals and thought politics and what happens in the country is none of their business. All of those professions are today increasingly getting engaged. They want to be part of the political process, they want to influence things, they want to make a change in the country. This is a very good sign that we are having these professionals engage with the political process and they want to be part of the process to shape the future of the country. So with engagement growing, I see a very promising civil society which is emerging in Pakistan. And a growing civil society again is a good omen for any state. So these are some of the fundamental forces, I think, on which ecosystem of any state depends. And in each of these forces, in each of these factors, you can very well see that the path is one of positive trajectory. Yes, there are certain negatives also. There are some fault lines on which we are struggling and which we have inherited from the military legacy of military rule. Every military government, when it comes into power, thinks that the mainstream political parties are its rivals. It tries to weaken them. It tries to persecute them. And in the process, it creates a space for many groups which are on the fringes to have larger than their size share in country's affairs. Whether it was Zia's martial law or it was Musharraf's martial law, every martial law ends up empowering those political actors who are on the fringes to have larger share, whether they are sectarian forces, whether those are ethnic groups, whether those are linguistic groups. They all sort of gain currency and they become more of a nuisance during that time. In '99, when our government was dismissed, I traveled from Karachi to Gwadar to approve the alignment of Makran Coast Highway. And believe you me, there were only 2 police vehicles in our convoy. And there was Chief Minister Balochistan with us, myself, Minister of Communication, and bunch of engineers from NASPA. We traveled almost 600 kilometers on Kacha track. We had no security issue. It is the same Makran coast that today we are having difficulty taking, carrying out rehabilitation work in earthquake zone, Avaran and all those areas with the nationalists and all this trouble. What is this? This is legacy of military rule. The same Akbar Bukti and Ataullah Mangal were part of the political process. They voted with us on 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment. And today the same political actors are sitting on the fringes and not even willing to shake hand with any politician who's considered as a symbol of federation. So, these are the fault lines, whether Balochistan or extremism, how the war was sucked into the tribal areas to create a case that, you need somebody in Pakistan to be there to continue to fight this war, and we in the process became internally destabilized. So these are the fault lines which we have inherited, but now we have a consensus in the country how to go about in dealing with them. There is no acceptance or there is no currency that we can give any concession to any group which believes in violence or which believes in imposing their agendas through violence. There can be a difference of opinion how to deal with them, but I can assure you in Pakistan there is no political party, mainstream political parties, whether I think it is PMLN or PPP, or you would even say that even though Khan Sahab, PTI talks, but as a vision he also would not like that these groups should be dominating or in any way be a player in our national politics through the power of their guns. So there could be difference in how to deal with them. But there is a complete consensus and we are trying to win back the space which has gone to them. So having said this about Pakistan, and final most promising transition which took place in May, that after 65 years we were able to bring about a change through democratic process, which if we had made in 50s, Pakistan would be a very different place today. But better late than never. We have seen a democratic transition. We have seen a government complete its tenure. And the only difference which played any role in making us what we are and making other countries what they are was lack of political stability. Malaysia was nowhere in 60s. Thailand was nowhere in 60s. South Korea's manufactured exports were about $100 million in early 60s and ours were $200 million. We had double the size of our manufactured exports portfolio than South Korea. But look where they are, where we are. The only thing which played a difference was political stability, because through political stability you have continuity in policies. We talk of corruption in Pakistan. Corruption has hurt us very much, but more than corruption, we have been hit by discontinuity in policies and political instability. And how you address corruption issue and development, I think we must understand how the world has dealt with corruption. Do you get development by first addressing corruption, or do you address corruption by first having development? I think the experience of the entire world is that the most logical way to deal with corruption is to continue on higher trajectory of development. As societies grow, they go on higher platform of development, their institutions become stronger, the citizens become more empowered, and accountability is better, there is more transparency, there is less discretion, and that is how you begin to control corruption. Bangladesh, for last 1 decade, was rated as #1 corrupt country by Transparency International. I'm sure you must be aware. But today, their taka is stronger than ours, and in 2013, their exports have overtaken Pakistan's exports. So what does it show? It is the political stability which matters the most, the continuity which matters the most for development. And if you continue on the development path, I think that is the best way to deal with corruption issue also. If we could deal with corruption through accountability, we have had 35 years devoted to accountability in our national history. But those 35 years of accountability has multiplied corruption manifold, has poisoned our politics, and has created more problems. So a very mature transition has taken place, that finally it seems that we have learned our lessons and moving on to a democratic path through the recent elections. And the beauty of this election was, I think, whether it was by design or it was accidental, this election has the best results possible for future of Pakistan. That the people of Pakistan put everybody to work. Nobody has the luxury to sit outside and throw stones at the house of anyone's glass. PTI has to deliver in KPK. People's Party has to deliver in Sindh. PMLN has to deliver in Punjab. And the Nationalists have to deliver in Balochistan. So everyone has work to do. And in next elections, they can all compete on performance. They can all show that what have they done to implement their manifestos, and it will be for the people to decide who has a better ability or capacity to take Pakistan further. So I think that we have a good mandate, a split mandate, where all the major parties have work to do. And if any one of the major party was outside the loop, there could be a danger that they might have an incentive to destabilize the system by playing irresponsible politics. But now everyone is a stakeholder and they all are responsible for their actions. Through this, now let me just very briefly say a few things on what's happened between May and now, and what we are intending to do and how your role fits in. Pakistan, as I said, is going through this transition, and we think that we are at a promising stage in terms of giving it a new direction. In 1998, we had done Pakistan 2010 program to set a long-term direction and agenda, how to accelerate Pakistan's transition to upper middle income countries level, and then from there move on to high income country status. But unfortunately in 99, when military took over, they discontinued the program, because they probably thought that if we continued with it, it will continue to give legitimacy to the previous government. If their plans were good, why did you throw them? So they had to show everything about previous government was evil. But then the irony was that there was no alternate plan given also. So for 14 years, Pakistan was run without any plan. You are businessmen here, and you know that if you even borrow $25,000 for your small business from a bank, they will first ask you to give us a 5-year business plan. Do you have a 5-year business plan? You cannot borrow even $25,000 without giving bank your 5-year business plan or projection. In Pakistan, we did not even have 3-year business plan. So when the country was run on year-to-year basis, nobody was looking at the long-term growth of demand and how are we going to cater to that demand. The result is a very serious and severe energy crisis, where our demand has grown, but we have not invested, one, in new sources of power, and two, in upgrading the infrastructure for transmission and distribution of power. So we have serious bottlenecks. If by any magic, normally people think that there is a demand and supply issue in the energy sector. If with a magic tomorrow I produce 20,000 megawatts, I have no means to take this 20,000 megawatts to the industries and to the consumers, because the transmission and distribution system is not capable of handling more than 16,000 megawatts. So we have that, a bottleneck, because it was not upgraded, it was not modernized. So the first thing, and the other worst thing they could do was that they abolished Ministry of Planning and Development. So there was no one in the country who was responsible to look for the future direction of the country. So we, when we came into government, revived Ministry of Planning and Development, and also expanded its scope from planning development to planning development and reform. Because we think in the world we live today, reform has to be a constant, because this is a very fast evolving world where forces of change are so powerful that even this thing today has gone into a museum. A company which 2 years ago was a market leader with 52% share on smartphone industry is today almost on the brink of bankruptcy. That's how the change, sweeps from under your feet the carpet on which you stand. So there has to be a continuous focus on reform and change internally in every economy and society. So to bring that in perspective, we made that mandate of our ministry, Planning, Development and Reform. We have started 2 plans, one 2025, to look at next 12 years horizon, where should Pakistan be, and what is it that we need to do to take Pakistan there in different areas, so that we have a roadmap for next 12 years. We don't want this to be our roadmap, to be PMLN roadmap or Nawaz Sharif roadmap or my roadmap. We want this to be Pakistan's roadmap. So we have invited all the political parties to designate their expert groups who should engage with us so that we have their input, and we want to work with them, and we want to create a broad-based buy-in of this program, because it is a program for Pakistan. So we hope that it will be a national plan, a national program. We have started work on it, and we hope to finish this program by end of December. So from January, inshallah, we'll formally launch it and start our journey on that. Then for medium term, we are doing a 5-year plan, which will coincide with the 5-year term of our government. Because cynics may say 2025 वो क्या उर्दू का शेर क्या है, कौन जीता है होने तक कि 20-25 तक पता नहीं कौन सी हुकूमत होगी, क्या होगा, तो why are you talking so abstract with us? So to be more specific, we have a 5-year plan which will coincide with the 5-year term of our government, so that we are also accountable for what we are doing in 5 years for those 2025 goals. And we will inshallah translate each of the goals into key performance indicators, for which we are setting up a performance delivery unit within our ministry to monitor performance of every ministry and department on monthly basis. How are they doing in terms of implementation? Because we have not been bad in doing plans. What we have not done well in the past is implementation of plans. So we really want to have a strong bias for implementation, for action, and that will be done through this delivery unit, so that we translate each 30,000 feet plan into a 3 feet landing plan on ground also. Because unless you land your 30,000 altitude policies on ground, they have no utility. We have 7 priority areas on which we are focusing. The first priority area is energy security, because right now the energy crisis is causing a 2 to 3% deficit or a shortfall in our growth every year, because of the load shedding, because of the power shortages in different sectors. So in next 5 years, we want to achieve energy security so that our economy does not suffer from energy shortages to realize its potential for growth, and for which we have a short-term, medium-term and long-term goals and roadmaps. In the short run, we have taken some very tough decisions. We have retired 500 billion rupees circular debt, which was stuck up for several years. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but we did it in order to bring online in the grid, additional 1700 megawatt, which was lying idle because of the stuck up payments. The oil payments, the companies owed to oil companies and refineries, and because they were not paying, they were not getting oil, and they could not run their plants because government was not paying these IPPs. So when we cleared these bills, they were able to pay the oil companies, and as a result now about 1500 to 1700 additional power is in the grid, in the system. Two, we are trying to improve operational efficiency of the system by bringing in better management, by trying to plug the holes, trying to do a campaign against electricity and power theft, gas and electricity sector, and also to apprehend the defaulters as well as the ones who are indulging in corruption. And then also focusing on demand management so that we are able to conserve power and manage the demand in a way to have another 800 plus minus megawatt savings. Then solar power we are also pushing as a quick fix. But then while the solar power gives us a quick fix in terms of operationalizing new power project, but the problem is solar is still expensive. It's 14, 15 cents somewhere, 13, 14, 15, 16 cents. Our problem is that because of our heavy reliance on oil-based power generation, the cost of power generation is very, very high. And we cannot afford 15, 16 cent power cost on a sustainable basis. It has to come down. So what is the way to change the cost structure? We must go on cheaper means of power generation. What are the cheaper options? Hydel, coal and gas. We have no gas. Hydel, it takes 5 to 10 years to put up a big plant. So our only best bet is then to go on coal-based power generation. So in the medium term, we are aiming to put online about 6,600 megawatts of coal-based power through Gadani Energy Park, in which we will set up 10 power plants of 660 megawatt each with help of investors. 2 plants government is trying to do from its own resources. For the others, we are trying to invite private sector investment. There are Chinese investors and others which are interested and they are coming. So medium term coal, long term is Dasu and Bhasha, the 2 hydel projects which have been stuck up. We are working on them. And we hope to start, it's very interesting, in last 5 years, Bhasha Dam 2 times there has been ribbon done, but still the land has not been acquired. So we have to, first acquire the land, which we hope to complete in this year. First, General Musharraf went, he did opening of Bhasha, but land had not even been acquired. Then it was Mr. Gilani, he went and did opening. But still they did have the land. So now we are going with the land and things, and we hope that we will complete it in next decade's time, because that's a 9 to 10 year long project, and it is absolutely critical for us because of its water relevance. We need cheap electricity, but more than cheap electricity, we also need a water reservoir, which if we did not build now, we may have a very serious food security challenge in next 10 years. The energy one. 2, we are making a shift from external drivers of growth to internal drivers of growth. Pakistan's growth rate, if you look in the past, has largely been a result of external drivers. Remittance, foreign aid, foreign loans. Every time we joined a geo-strategic theatre, we were recipients of very liberal foreign aid, foreign loans. And that inflow of dollars jacked up our numbers, and we had growth rate for the period. We were part of the theatre. As soon as the inflows dried, our growth rates came down. We did not do enough to work on our endogenous factors, internal drivers, which could be more sustainable. So, what can be the internal drivers? 1, your own resources through tax reforms. We have come down from 13.5% tax to GDP ratio, which was there in 99 when we left government, to less than 9 today. It's, really very, very, very shameful that a country like Pakistan should have less than 9% tax to GDP ratio. Whereas, if we had just maintained the 13.5%, which we had in 99, we would have more than 1 trillion rupees in our kitty. And we would have no need to go to IMF or look at other carry-lugar inflows to sustain our balance of payments. 2, we want to improve savings and investment rates, because every country which does high growth rates has a higher investment and saving rates, and in our case they are lowest in the region. 3, we want to invest in our science, technology and innovation sector, because in today's global economy you cannot have sustainable growth if you are not competitive, and in order to be competitive you have to have strong knowledge foundations through science, technology and innovation. And 4, on the basis of science, technology and innovation, create a more robust export sector, because exports is the only means through which you can develop sustainable reserves of foreign exchanges which can meet your development needs. 3, focus on human and social capital. We have ignored in the past the software side of our development equation. We thought building highways, building dams, physical infrastructure was all development about. So we did fairly good job in physical infrastructure, but we did not do anything on social side. So we are now bringing social sectors into mainstream. That includes education, healthcare, population and all that. 4, focusing on small, medium enterprises and private sector as a catalyst of growth. Government has lost its ability everywhere, whether United States, Europe or Asia or Africa. Governments cannot lead the investment drive. It has to be private sector led. It has to be foreign direct investment led. And within our domestic industry, because we have a young population, we need job creation. And job creation will come from SME sector. So that is our priority area, and we have taken some steps in that direction. 5, creating a modern infrastructure which is capable of sustaining higher levels of growth. As I gave you an example in power sector, that the infrastructure is a bottleneck. Even if you have more power, there is no way you can transmit it, you can distribute it. So we need to invest in our infrastructure, whether it is power, whether it is transportation, whether it is our cities, whether it is our water. At every level of infrastructure, we need to upgrade it so that we can sustain high levels of growth. But more importantly, what is different, our infrastructure strategy has a very strong focus on regional connectivities. We think that Pakistan's future is in developing regional connectivities and integrating 3 engines of growth in Asia: South Asia, China and Central Asia. 3 regions have 3 billion population. Almost half of the population lives in this region, this part of the world. And if we can integrate the 3 regions and we can become the hub, that will have enormous opportunities for Pakistan. And not only it will bring opportunities for the region, it will also be a great opportunity for the global economy, where Europe, United States, everyone will have great opportunities of business, and this might help revive the global economy. 6th, making a transition from low value to high value economy. Agriculture, industry, services, in every area we are still very much commodity based economy. Our services are very low value. We still love to export yarn. For every dollar of yarn we export, we can increase our earnings $15 to $20 if we go on to garments. We still like to export commodity products like wheat. For every dollar we earn from wheat, if we go on more exotic products, if we go on horticulture products, we can do $20 to $30, revenue for every dollar in agriculture we can produce. Similarly, in services, we have making now of putting Pakistan as a mini ICT power on the world map. Pakistan in many respects is ready to now graduate to next level where it can become another hub of ICT, software, information technology and knowledge related businesses. Over the years we have had mushroom growth in this sector, and now I think we just need to package it, create the links. I was in Silicon Valley this weekend. I had meetings with some of the leading CEOs and chief technology officers, and I was very happy to hear. They were not just Pakistanis telling this. They were, white Americans saying this, that our Lahore operation, offshore operation in Lahore, is more productive than our operations in Bangalore or any other place. They were so happy that, you know, the Pakistani offshore business is doing better than all the other offshore companies, or in other cases, if they were not doing better, they were as good as their best other offshore operations. So we have a great potential. So that is an area where we want to go on to evaluation. Finally, seventh is focusing on governance and institutional reforms, so that we can create better capacity in democratic governance to provide people better security, to create better peace in the country, and to create better quality of service delivery, so that citizens' confidence in the state and in the government is restored. There was a time when government used to provide quality services to citizens in education and health and security, in municipal services, but over the years, this capacity has been very much lost and, you know, undermined. So we need to focus on rebuilding the institutions, to modernize them, to do civil service reform, to upgrade technology capability of many of these institutions, to use e-government practices. Today I am going to IBM also to learn from them, you know, what are their best practices which they have deployed in USA, working with different municipal, state and federal government departments to make performance of government departments better. Similarly, in Pakistan, we are seeking support from different leading players in this area. So we're trying to improve the governance, and we have made a very considerable allocation of about 1 billion rupees for different governance initiatives. We are setting up about 250 million rupee fund, which is innovation fund in government, where government officers will be able to submit their request for grants if they want to do any innovation in service delivery, if they want to.
Sounds funny actually.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, what happens is that there are now many enterprising young civil servants who have been educated abroad, and they want to do many things. But our government budgeting systems are such, they are not very much in favor of catering new ideas. So we are going to create this out-of-system innovation fund, where these officers will be able to, if they want to really try something new, they will be able to submit a proposal, and there will be a committee of experts which will then, you know, take up 50 or 100, you know, such proposals every year and finance them and see that how can we create innovation within the government. So this is the overall roadmap, and to fulfill it, our approach is to develop a collaborative mode. Government cannot do it by itself. We have real capacity issue in the government structures. The capacity is in the private sector, the capacity is in academia, the capacity is in the diaspora. So therefore, our model of development is a model of collaboration and partnership, and a flat planning approach, where we create flat structures so that Pakistani talent, regardless of where he or she is, they can be part of the process, and we can create the right link. So I am here to, you know, request you, come, help us, do what you want to do. You have a customer here who is willing to serve you, and we will do whatever is in our grasp to help you serve your motherland, your country where you have your roots, although you are American citizens now, but you know, Pakistan continues to be a place of our roots. So in whichever way you can contribute, you will find us more than happy to receive you, to facilitate you, and be part of our think tank in a way. You know, if you cannot do something in material, give us your ideas, give us your advice, and I think that will be very valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.